So, Jim, I think today, as we've discussed so many different things, we both have kind of cited examples in our North American healthcare system, Western medicine, whatever you want to call it, um, because of our experience as fathers, having brought our children to doctors in the 80s and the 90s, and now our own athletic experiences where they get busted up and you got to get stitched up or you need an operation or whatever. And now today we have COVID and we have this kind of burgeoning, castration of young people without the permission of their parents, and doctors jumping on this bandwagon, and all these, and the COVID thing was, you got 50% of these doctors say wear a mask and get a vaccine, and 50% of them say that's ridiculous, the masks don't work and the vaccines don't work. As a matter of fact, the vaccines are harmful. So again, how does one know what to believe? And whether you want to take it back to you being a dad bringing your kid to the doctor in the 80s and 90s, or you want to talk about your own surgery from rugby, or anything that you've had kind of a personal interaction with, what are your thoughts on, is this system all fucked up or what?
Well, yes, the answer to your question, the system is a complete clusterfuck. But like you said, let's personalize it, right? We have our own experiences, then we have experiences you hear from others. The most let's just say personal experiences when my father had passed right before COVID, and to this day, my sisters, my brother, my mother, were grateful that he passed the way, the time he did and the way he did. And nobody, of course, we miss him, and that part is very sad. But he had a lung condition, and that lung condition was very rapid. He was hiding it. In fact, we found out later that this had been going on for a year, but you didn't notice it. You noticed his personality change, and then it accelerated, and eventually it was difficult for him to breathe, and then that was it. But about that time, this is 19, so it's right before COVID hits, and we had a family friend. He was kind of my childhood mentor. I think I've shared that with you before. As we have secondary role models that influence us as men, and it could be a coach or a neighbor. And he was taken to the hospital during COVID. And this is his daughter explaining this to me, and his son. It was probably one of the most difficult things I've ever heard about a healthcare system that, maybe with good intentions, wanted to help him. But what they ended up doing was, one, he couldn't have any visitors for that time period, right? The COVID lockdown. But two, he didn't even have COVID somehow. And we find out later that it's happened quite a bit. They gave him COVID, or they found something related to COVID, but then his reason of death was not COVID, but it was, of course, COVID related, which we found out later on that was an insurance scam to some degree, right? If you can label it, then they got funding. But they ended up having to put him in a horrible position in bed and upside down and all these different things, and nobody could visit him. And that was his final minutes of life. And I just, because he meant to me, but what I heard his son and daughter describe that horrible experience, nobody deserves that. And I said, is that progress? Is that modern medicine? Did they do that? Obviously, we would like, and so those are the two personal stories that made me really, really question how far have we gone with this? And then I'll share one last one. I want to get your thoughts. And this is, another one close to home. Somebody very close has been in and out of the hospital and ill for the last several years. Also, Mark, remember, this is also this time period in our lives, right? As we move into these, late 50s, 60s, we're going to experience this more and more and more.
Yep.
It's going to be your father, unfortunately, your brother, my mother, all these things. This is something that we're all dealing with. And it's the unfortunate part of this period of time, because no matter who you speak to, the conversation is going to end up somehow about a medical condition of yourself or somebody you care about. So, but yeah. And I think the other sad part is you hear these stories that they go into the hospital with one thing, and then before you know it, 2.5 years go by. And if they had any personal wealth built up, they've drained the account, right?
Yeah.
Because the cost of care is so expensive. And eventually, depending on what type of care you have, you're going to go into your personal life savings. So what a way to end your life, right? That you spend the whole life accumulating wealth for security, then you give it to a healthcare system in your final years, maybe even final months of your life. Something's not right.
Yeah, that's the other side of the healthcare system, which is the actual interaction with the insurance companies and what's covered and what's not covered, and how inflated the charges are for different things. You know, aspirins are $15 a piece or whatever. But there's so many things going through my head right now because I'm thinking about my childhood, and I'm thinking about two things. One is I had that thing that happens when you grow really fast in your knees, Osgood slatters or something like that. It's pretty common. First doctor I went to, very reputable orthopedic surgeon with my father. Oh, we can just operate on that. We'll get rid of some of that cartilage and he'll be back up and running in a matter of days. My father was kind of like, I think we're going to get a second opinion on that. You know, my father was really good about that.
Yeah.
Took me to another guy, also world renowned. He goes, no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put him in a waterproof cast, immobilize his leg for the summer so he can swim, he can run around, he'll be hopping, but no operation. I would not operate. That's not an operational. So it's like both these guys are reputable and one of them's just cutting for money and the other one actually gives a shit. Now that might be an oversimplification, but I'm walking around on two good knees at 61 years of age because of a decision my father made to intervene. The second story is I'm 12 years old and I'm walking to school with my older brother, and our dog runs out into the street. Ribby runs batted in, RBI. We were a baseball family.
I could tell.
And this car comes down the road, smacks my dog, screeching the brakes, but hit him pretty good. He rolled a couple times, just fell down. Everyone thought he was dead. The guy that's driving the car is my pediatrician from down the street. He gets out of the car. He comes over, he kneels down next to the dog, puts his hands on the dog, looks up at me and Jim and says, I'm so sorry, guys. I'm so sorry. She's gone. 5 seconds later, Ribby jumps up and takes off and runs back to the house. That's my fucking pediatrician. So I was raised, I shouldn't say not to trust doctors, but I was never raised by someone who said, let's put them up on a pedestal, right? It was the opposite. It was like, question everything, question your faith, question the doctors. Yeah. So I took that into my role as a father. And I remember going to the doctor with my kids, and you must have done it a million times too, for little stuff and big stuff, you know, from broken arms to stitches to hernia extractions to respiratory challenges. And when you ask questions of doctors, most of them get a little offended, you know, and I think that is at the core of what we're talking about. It goes back to the educational system. It goes back to the societies putting them on platforms and pedestals. There's movies made about doctors, and they're always talking about them having God complexes and all this other stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it's also, I think it goes way back, and I'm not a historian, but I think it goes way back to the Carnegies and the Rothschilds and the big Rockefellers. And they got into this medical business early, in the prescription drug business early, and they saw where it could go. And I think it's just evolved. I mean, I got one friend of mine, he's more of a colleague than a friend. He's on 9 different prescription drugs. 9, right? He's overweight. He's always sipping on root beer and eating fucking cake. And I'm like, dude, you lost 40 pounds. You get rid of 5 of those scripts like that. You know, he has a condo on the beach and he doesn't walk on the beach. You know, so I think there's so many, and you know, and then I've told you this story before. I'm happy to share it publicly. My mom took her own life like 6-7 years ago in bad health, didn't want to go back into the hospital, didn't want another hip operation, whatever, just gave up. There's a whole institution that supports this. And to your point about your dad and your friend, at what point do we get to a point where it's like, okay, can we peacefully end this person's life and put them out of pain? Or is that a violation of my religious beliefs and should it be against the law? That's a very interesting conversation.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the answer to that is.
Well,
But
I
anyway,
don't think we know what the answer is, but I do appreciate what you're saying about first of all, my mother was a nurse. My mother-in-law was a nurse. My sister's a nurse. My sister-in-law's a nurse. My cousin's a nurse. My grandmother's a nurse. So I can't say enough about nurses and RNs. So
mhm,
whatever we're talking about is no disrespect at all to those people.
absolutely.
They are just doing their job, and this is not a personal. And I'll even say that for doctors, right? They're just doing what they were taught in medical school. So I think that's important to say. A lot of this, they have the best intentions.
I would qualify that. I would absolutely say that about nurses. I don't think nurses are interested in anything. And this is the vast majority of them. I don't think this is an outlier thing. The vast majority of them are interested in the care of their patients and nothing else.
Mhm.
But they're surrounded by systems and doctors and other people in the process, administrators,
That's right.
insurance companies, that don't allow them to do that the way that they would
Absolutely.
want to do it.
So yeah, so let's break this down, right? Let's talk about doctors, and then there's even, let's just say, two categories of that. Uh, First of all, to be a doctor, like anything, you have to have a huge ego.
Mhm.
And that applies to sports, that applies to any kind of position. You have to have an ego or insecurity that's so big to take on such a monumental task
Mhm.
of 6 years of residency, medical school, all the different things that's required to become a doctor. So, and they are about as close to God as you're going to get, right?
Mhm.
In terms of controlling the life of another human being. But I also think you have to talk about surgeons, and then of course medication, because they're all taught to prescribe medication for
Mhm.
a pill will solve any solution in their mind. That's what they call medicine, right? They're in
Mhm.
medicine. But surgery, that's kind of a different cat to some degree.
Mhm.
And there's no question there is an ego, and there's bragging rights by the
Mhm.
amount of surgeries you have, and by being published, and so on and so on. So we are an experiment. That's why they call it a practice. They're
Mhm.
practicing medicine.
Mhm. Yeah.
They're practicing surgery.
That's a solid observation, dude. That's a
Yeah.
solid
Yeah.
observation.
So,
Yeah.
and I know that's hard for some people to maybe realize, but yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I hire somebody to fix my toilet, I don't want them practicing on my toilet. I just
Right.
want my toilet
Right.
fixed, right?
Right.
But there's a reason why they call it a practice, because
Yeah. I was just talking to, actually, my girlfriend is in a business that's involved in using MRI technology and a specific surgery to help people get rid of essential tremor. Very, very specific procedure. And she's been told by a bunch of I think they're neurosurgeons, so really high performing people, that they've said to her before, the first 100 of these I did a pretty good job, but now I'm really good at this. And I'm thinking, well, what happened to patient number one? You know, but how do you get around?
Well, you can't get around. That's what I'm saying.
Can't.
And part of it is just the nature of research and doing things. But uh, but yeah. So in terms of I'll just my stories. Oh, here's the other thing I think it's really, really important to talk about. If you just look at our uh, lifespan, right? Since in the last 50 years, in terms of the American diet and the marketing of foods and the ingredients of food, that's criminal as well, because that's poison, basically, especially when you get into some of these genetically modified grains and oils and all these different things. So let's not forget that a lot of these diseases are coming from our food system, and
Dude,
our
there's no
government.
question. There's no question.
Yeah.
I've said to you before, when I check out of the grocery store, and we both joke about not being judgmental. Well, human nature is to be judgmental, so you have to fight against it. At least that's my experience. I look at the cart in front of me of the person who's clearly overweight and probably classified as obese. Everything in the cart is not just not good for you; it's poison.
It's
Right?
poison, and those are the people that have these conditions
Yep.
that just keep getting more medications. And again, I know your daughter is really knows this space and helps has a thriving business that helps women with this. And what are? They're gut issues, right? Gut issues related to what they're putting into their system.
Intake.
So
Yep.
it's intake, right?
Yep.
And that's a lot of these problems come from that in terms of.
So the question for me is, and we talked about this the other day about a community of people taking care of themselves versus a different community adding to the problem. So aren't we as humans, as Americans, responsible for our own health?
Yes.
We've given that up. We've given that up to the medical community. And when there's this whole, to refer to my daughter's whole industry that's developed now, that's holistic. It's no prescription drugs, just good food, good liquids, the things you put on your skin, that what you expose yourself to stress wise, your eyes, your ears, what you watch, what you hear. What we've done in part is say, okay, just you threw me a life preserver, and instead of swimming to the boat, because I know how to swim, because I made sure I knew how to swim, I'm just going to grab the life preserver and just depend on you to get me to safety. That's kind of what we've done with the medical community, right? So some of it's our fault.
Well, it is. And like you said, this is an evolution over the last 50 years, but we started making some really bad foods. We started marketing those foods, TV dinners, fast food, Doritos, potato chips, Coca-Cola. I mean, again, it's like, some people drink a 6-pack a day or a week. I mean, how could you put that stuff in your body?
My best friend's mom was addicted to it. I think she drank like 17 or 18 Cokes a day.
Absolutely. It was common. So now you fast forward, now they're in their 80s, and we have these basically warehouses full of people that have poisoned themselves all their lives. And we have doctors now and medicine and insurance companies that are trying to keep them alive. And I happen to believe that it's a form of cruelty, and it's inhumane in terms of there's no way, even in life expectancy. Who said you're supposed to live until 100? How about the quality of life instead of the length of life, right? And I think we have to have these conversations.
My dad, as I've told you before, is 94, and he's not on any prescription medication. He still drives his own car, and he still goes and buys his own groceries. He goes to church every day. He is an amazing example, but from the outside looking in, since I know him so well, and I've watched him act and eat and grow and get old and retire, and he brings it when it's from a personal accountability standpoint. There's no one is surprised by his condition, because anyone who knows him, because they've seen this guy's been bringing that health game, faith, health, sleep, eat, move around, smile, laugh, all of them. He brings them all every day. So that, to me, the message to me, to anyone listening, is, at least in part, if you're in the middle of this, if you're making a choice as to which way to go, rest assured you can cure virtually anything that is in front of you by changing and modifying your behavior today and continuing that.
Which starts with diet.
Right. What you eat, what you put in your mouth, how much you eat, how many times you chew your food, all of these things.
Yeah. And it starts with, like you said, what you put in the basket. But before you put it in the basket, read the label. And if you don't read the label, then you shouldn't be surprised if you're not feeling so good. And it's the same with medicine. If you look at the placebo effect of medicine, because that's the how you measure it, right? They do the placebo test. Sometimes they're not that far off the placebo test. 1 or 2% makes it a successful drug. Yeah. Then you look at the side effects of one drug that creates another problem.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, like you said, you're on 3 or 4 medications. You don't even know where it's like Frankenstein. You don't know where you started.
Well, and this is why, with due respect to the doctors, and I appreciate your distinction between doctors and nurses, because I look at nurses with completely positive thoughts, and I look at doctors with complete skepticism. But
with good intentions. I think all doctors go into this with nothing but good intentions to save people.
Maybe go into it, yeah. But I mean, we had a neighbor who was one of the preeminent heart surgeons in the world. He operated on John Wayne and Henry Kissinger, among others.
Interesting.
And this guy was known in the world as like a badass. He didn't have 1 ounce of humility. He was an arrogant prick, right? And so I don't think you can bring arrogant prickiness to the operating table and have the best intentions of the person lying on the table in mind. I think you got a lot more going on than just that. So I think we can, and I don't even know that we disagree on that. I just think you want to add a level of appreciation for those doctors who do have good intentions.
I do. That's all.
And that's fine. But I think they might be in the minority, and that's unfortunate. But I also think the conditions of the healthcare industry, including the insurance companies, the CDC, the FDA, the American Medical Association, cancer institutes, they're all making it more difficult for these doctors to just care and cure. Go into a doctor's office and sit in the waiting room for an hour and see how many pharmaceutical reps walk in and leave samples. Same thing with the dentist.
Well, look at just what we found out last week. Well, we know there was collusion between the CDC and our other so-called healthcare experts. And it turns out these decisions are being made during COVID were driven often by the drug companies. And the more you learn this collusion, there used to be separation between these so-called agencies. And now there's complete collusion and lobbyists that are feeding politicians and feeding this. And this is where it's really gone. I believe it's becoming dangerous. There's just so many self-interest comes before the best of the.
No, it's a great point. I think, we were talking on another podcast about, people like Pelosi making money off the stock market, fronting, getting inside information and dropping $100 million in their bank account. And it's like, well, I think Fauci was making money off the pharmaceutical companies. That's sick. I mean, how can something like so obvious as that be allowed to go on, be allowed to happen in the first place? I mean, I think it's a lot of this has to do with the fact that I think these people in positions of power, and doctors are in power, they're in power positions. They really think they're better than us. They think we're stupid. And that's a bit of an exaggeration. But, when I've gone in with my kids or on my own and had conversations, doctors are like, this is what we're going to do. I'm like, okay, why are we going to do that? And half of them look at me like I got my head screwed on backwards. Like, how could you possibly question what I'm saying? I'm like, I question everybody. I question my priest. I question my father. I'm certainly not going to just go, okay, here's my kid, and then that rolls into this whole situation now with this group of physicians that actually think that if a small child, the age of 7 or 3 or 11 or 12, who isn't allowed to drive a car, drink a beer, vote, or anything, get married, anything, is you're going to listen to a small child, and then you're going to listen to that child. I'm a boy, but I think I'm a girl, so I'm going to bring him in. We're going to cut his penis off, and we're going to start pumping him with pills. There are adults that actually believe that conversation should be happening, and we should actually consider that as a possibility. That's insane.
Yeah, we're going a little bit outside the lanes, but there are
doctors. It's a burgeoning industry, and some of the doctors are saying that's a revenue stream, and I'm going after it.
I see your point, Mark. Your point is this is a business, and we can't forget that they're not doing this they're building businesses. They're building, like anybody in business, they have to build a practice and an opportunity, and they seize on these. Yeah.
Well, if you go to, and I'm not well versed in the different distinctions between this doctor and that doctor, but if you go to a heart surgeon, or you go to a neurosurgeon, or you go to a neurologist, or you go to a ear, eye, nose, and throat, all of these different disciplines, and you have something that both of them, you need their input on from two different specialties because of the nature of the malady, whatever it might be, you're going to likely get two different protocols, because this protocol is in the best interest of the neurologist, but it's not in the best interest of the surgeon.
Yeah, that's right? I'll speak to that. I'll share a quick story with you. This is in recent, like last year or something. But as you know, I played rugby, so I had neck surgery right after I actually won my first national championship, and I shouldn't have played. They said not to, but I ended up playing, and it kind of came off the field, and the second half, and we won the national championship. But the weeks before that, the doctor told me, hey, you heard this C6, C7 herniated disc. You do this again, you're going to be a paraplegic, right? So anyway, it all worked out. And then went to a doctor, and at the time he was one of the best surgeons, but that's right. Cause I was asked to play on it wasn't the US team. It was a couple levels before the trying out for the US team. One of the coaches at the time asked me to participate in this camp or whatever, right, to play at this next level. And I said, no, I can't. I'm at my neck. And he says, so he referred me to this doctor. Anyway, went to this doctor, got the surgery, ended up being fine. And then here we fast forward, I don't know, 20 something years, and my neck's bothering me again. And so I went to another doctor, tried to get a couple shots of epidurals, all these different things. And so he's talking about surgery. He wants to do a surgery on me, right? Mm-hmm. The doctor this time. And I said, what I'm going to do? I'm going to take my MRI and all my x-rays, and I'm going to bring them to this guy that did my surgery 20 years ago and see what he says. Is he still? So I first had to find him. I found him. He was at UCSF in San Francisco. Took me like a month to get the appointment. More than that, took me 4 months to get an appointment with him. But I was like, hey, I got nothing to lose, right? I had the MRIs. So I of course, I can't miss the appointment. I spend the whole day, getting into San Francisco. I walk up there, and as some of the staff were there, so they saw the old report. I had actually the old report after the surgery. So he looks at the surgery, or looks at the MRI, and he said, he's looking at it, he goes, no, you're fine. And he goes, you don't qualify for surgery. So this is very different than what the other guy's saying, right? And it turns out that he's at the later stage of his career. He's one of the best in the world, but he really gets into taking people that like are paraplegic and makes them walk again. That's his thing. He's the best in the world. I didn't qualify. He says, look, you're not that bad. I'm not operating on you. Go somewhere else. Like, I'm not kidding. This, I waited probably 4 to 6 months for this appointment. It was over in less than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And he just looked at me and said, no, I'm not doing it.
Dude, think of how many people that don't have the wherewithal to question just intellectual curiosity. I really would like the opinion of the guy that worked on me 20 years ago. That's a very prudent, logical thing to think. It's a great move. Think of what would have happened had you not done that.
You know what? Now that you mention it, a lot of things would have been different. I could have went to surgery. It was possibly not successful. This neck surgery is very, very complicated. The recoveries and all kinds of things could go wrong. But it also, this is back to the placebo effect. Just the fact that he said, I'm okay. Guess what? I started feeling better.
Yeah. Well, you do. You lock up. When I was going through
the anxiety of the unknown, and your body's telling yourself you're always, So
when I was going through my shit, and I hit some pretty high stress levels for short periods of time, pre-trial, police engagement, things that would, the back of my shoulder blades would not up where I couldn't even turn my neck. It was completely emotional. It was completely It's fascinating how emotions can manifest in physical maladies. And I think a lot of people don't know that. But before I lose my train of thought, the imperfection piece that we like to bring into our podcast, I think people need to understand that these doctors, well-intentioned or not, they're human beings. They're imperfect. They make mistakes. Yep. They don't know everything. And I've seen too many parents bring their kids to doctors and just like, let him go in. I'm going to do whatever he says. And it's like, I think this is the middle-aged men that might be listening, anybody that might be listening, particularly people that have kids. I think you have to go into medical conversations with your eyes open. And that means the insurance companies involved in this, the nurses are involved, the doctors are involved, the pharmaceutical companies are involved. The FDA and the CDC are probably connected in some capacity to this experience you're about to go through. And you can't trust it. You can't trust the system on its own. You have to question it because these are human beings and they're imperfect. Yeah. And I think that we got to stop putting these people up on pedestals. You know how many people listen to Dr. Fauci as though his word was gospel? Wow. That's scary, man. Yeah. That guy was a freaking idiot.
He really was.
He was a two-faced
but I want to go back to, and I appreciate what you said. I want to go back to this before we lose this thought about there was other things going on in your life that were stiffening up your back or your neck, right? And that ultimately was what was wrong with me. It was too much time on the computer with I'm left-handed, but I was using my right hand. It was holding the cell phone. That was really starting to affect my neck. And then the stress, like you said, of doing work and all these different things, as you know, I have, I'm dyslexic, and it's difficult to write in general, it being dyslexic. So there's a lot of stress but it's behavior. Instead of going into surgery, straight to surgery or medicating it, you have to look at yourself and go, what behaviors can I change to maybe first before I to change the outcome of this? And then there's certain times, surgery is the best route to go. But
I think the takeaway is there's a number of them, but I think that if I could suggest one thing, and I do that a lot in my career coaching as well, it's just get people to reflect on the way that they're doing things and start to think, well, maybe there's a better way. Like, we have proof. I have living proof. I have firsthand proof that if you eat good food and you drink good water and you don't drink soda or juice or anything really other than water, keep your alcohol consumption at bay, don't smoke, you find a routine of exercise that you enjoy, so you look forward to it, walking, swimming, biking, doesn't matter, right? There's meditation, there's breath work you can do. If you do all those things and figure out how to manage your stress and get good sleep, which are not easy things to do, there's a high probability that unless you have some sort of genetic predisposition, you can take care of yourself, And I don't think we're talking about that nearly enough in North America, because the big institutions, I mean, dude, I told you the story about my daughter. She was doing one-on-one with people about food. And it was at the time, years ago now, Florida state law, the Florida Department of Health has a law that says if you don't have a license, you cannot speak to people about the nutrition value of food one-on-one, face-to-face without a license. They got an agent from the Florida Department of Health, called her up off her website number, scheduled a cup of coffee, and said she had a gut issue. My daughter went to meet with her, and she said, are you, and I won't use my daughter's name, but are you this person? And she said, yeah. And she was bubbly, like, yeah, how can I help? Bam, cease and desist, $800.
Yeah.
She was devastated. Eventually took her company online, alleviating her of any state law regulations, and got a couple of registered dietitians who are licensed to be able to do diagnostic work and prescriptions and things of that. Although she doesn't prescribe medicine, she prescribes supplements. But I've been surrounded by, and you being an athlete at such a high level, dude, you probably spent a good bit of time talking to doctors and getting, somebody looking at you,
Yeah. The other thing, and when people ask for at least advice or opinions, you also have to realize if you walk into a hospital not sick, you'll walk out sick.
Yeah.
If you walk into a doctor's office, whether you're sick or not, you're going to walk out with a problem. That's just the way it is. And you forget that, right? Chiropractors are another good example of that. Yeah. There's not a chiropractor office in the United States that you couldn't walk into that's going to tell you that you're perfectly fine and you never need to come back. They'll find something wrong with you.
Yeah.
And that applies to just about any of those offices. If you walk in to an office, you're going to walk out with a problem. And it's just a matter of really understanding, is that the best course to take to fix that problem, and look at more holistic problems going on in your life or your behaviors or your diet or your exercise and so on. And then
I think the best balance, I can't remember the guy's name. I think he's here in Florida. He was a heart surgeon that had a heart attack one day, and he reevaluated his view of medicine. And he basically came back into the profession and said, I'm no longer going to be just willy-nilly distributing prescription drugs for high blood pressure and cholesterol and things of that nature. What I'm going to do is we're going to come in, we're going to sit down, we're going to put you on a program. And the goal is you have to take these medications so you don't die. But over the course of the next 3 to 6 months, we're going to do lifestyle work with you to get you off of them. And we're going to do that intentionally. Yeah. So I think that's the sweet spot in the medical community.
And I'm an 80-20 on this, but I've been doing this. I'll call it a diet, but it's called a carnivore diet, right? Where it's mainly meat.
Mhm.
And this guy's really interesting. He's a MD, is a professional rugby player, lives in Australia now. And there's another guy I'm following, another MD, and he's from Costa Rica. But they're let's just say fundamental message is that you minimize the types of food. You break it down to a carnivore diet, almost a meat-based diet.
Mhm.
And then they give research and facts, evidence about, of course, the American diet in terms of processed foods, but also even vegetables and other types of foods. And it's remarkable the benefits of simplifying your diet and not having, because foods have counter reactions to one another, right? So it's not just what you eat, it's what combination of foods you eat. And it turns out, of course, whole foods or organic foods, whether it's whole milk, like we've been told not to eat butter, not to eat fat. Well, it turns out that actually that's very good for you. And it was very good for our grandparents and so on and so on. So I've added a lot of that back into my diet, and I feel great. I really do. It's
interesting. I can't remember who the comedian was, but he was talking about this in the context. It's like, okay, it's like, remember when eggs were bad for you?
but in fairness, they are bad for you. If you look at some eggs, like let's just use butter, for example. Margarine is all chemicals. That's not even butter.
That's right.
It's a substitute butter, right?
That's right.
Same with sweeteners.
Yeah.
The whole idea is you get back to eating whole butter or
yeah, no, I'm with you. I know. And this is a topic we could talk about for so long. It's just, I'm so glad we got into it because it's so interesting. I think that to wrap it up, I think it's like I said, I think people need to question things. We can't just, there are still people walking around by themselves with masks on. I mean, the human nature is, if somebody in a position of authority scares us, we get scared.
Yeah.
Instead, we should go, wait a second, let me, like you say, let's unpack that. I need more information. It's like when my daughter had not yet gotten the vaccine. I think she ended up getting it so she could travel. She didn't want to get it. And she was in a group of people that are pretty liberal. And they were all like, you're crazy. How come you're not getting it? And she said, I don't have enough information. And I said, that's a great answer, honey. That is a great answer.
Yeah.
Because it's true, and now we find out now, and we can close up with this, that almost everything that we were told about this dreaded disease was complete bullshit. That's no longer a conspiratorial theory.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Yeah. And so, Jim, I don't know if you had any last thoughts, but I really enjoyed.
Yeah, just what you put in your body, right?
Yeah.
It starts with what you put into your mouth, what you put, what medications you put in, what medications did you inject with needles, and that's fundamental.
I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. I get it, right? So enjoy the day, live every day as if it's your last. But to make that choice in middle age of going, I'm going to just grab that life raft and I'll take all that shit for the rest of my life. And I'll get my sleep apnea machine, and I'll go to, I'll get all it, and I'll get the operations because I'm so fat, I'm going to have operations coming. And that's just my only choice. It's not your only choice. There's a whole other choice to make, and it's not easy, but it's simple, and I've made that choice. I'm not perfect, but most of the food I eat is organic. Most of the food I eat, I make, and most of the things that I drink are just purified water. And I move around a lot, and I'm no saint, and I'm no special guy. It's simple.
Yeah.
So
even 80-20 too, right? Do 80, even if you did that 80% of the time, the 20% you cheat, you're really in a much better position if you've done it 100% of bad foods and bad.
Yeah. The system you're going into is imperfect. The people in the system are imperfect. Yes. Keep that in mind. Have a nice day.
Yeah.
Thanks,
All right,
Jim.
Mark. Till next week. All right. Talk to you later.